Net. My name is Alexey Borisenko. Today I'm thrilled to have Omar Santos with us. We will be talking about AI and security. Omar, would you please present yourself?
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you everybody for joining. My name is Omar Santos. I'm part of the Security and Trust organization. That is an organization within Cisco that we help protect customers and protect Cisco. Actually, that's our mission. And we have many different groups within this organization. We have the PSERT organization, the Product Security Incident Response Team. Those are the engineers and incident managers that will investigate any security vulnerabilities in Cisco products and services. We're the ones that actually publish the security advisories that you may be familiar with. Within STO, also there's an offensive security team, basically a group of security researchers, and this is separate from Talos. What they're specifically doing is looking for zero-day vulnerabilities in Cisco products and services. We also have the traditional CSIRT team for incident response internally to the enterprise, the insider threat team, our SDL, so the Security Development Lifecycle program resides within our environment. And specifically what I'm tasked to do is to look in the ways that attackers are actually using AI to help protect the company, and of course protect customers, as well as actually doing research on the security best practices that we should be employing to protect the enterprise and also protect products, right? So as people are integrating AI throughout all the products at Cisco, what are going to be the techniques and the capabilities, for us to actually help protect those implementations. So again, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks. Would you please explain a little bit about your work in product security incident response team, whether maybe you have detected some vulnerabilities also connected with generative AI or AI that affect Cisco products?
Yeah. So I was part of PSERT. I'm still part of the same organization. So overall, it's called Security and Trust. And within PSERT, we're currently evaluating the usage of AI across the organization to help accelerate some of the business processes that we have, from looking at known vulnerabilities and how to actually make that more digestible to the rest of the company and to the rest of the world by that chance, and also looking even outside of AI how we should transform vulnerability disclosures through automation. So I'm kind of wearing multiple hats because I'm also part of the board of a nonprofit organization called OASIS, and it's a standards organization. So if you have an AMBLA alert in your phone, that's an OASIS standard. STIX taxi for threat intelligence, that's another OASIS standard. And in there we have a few things that we are working on. One that we're going to be announcing within the next couple of weeks, and it's a coalition for secure AI. And that one is actually to define best practices, not only for vendors and manufacturers, but also the whole ecosystem, from cloud to the supply chain and of course consumers, on how to secure these newer implementations. It's not an overlap of the things like NIST or MITRE are doing. As a matter of fact, they actually are going to be collaborating with us to help co-develop some of these standards. So the standards, we'll not call it the future. We're asking a lot of questions that should have been asked 10 years ago, but looking into see how technology is evolving and how security has to evolve as well. So
Yeah, awesome, thanks. So in our daily life we usually also now interact with a lot of tools, including AI and Gen AI tools. Can we discuss a little bit our top 10 for LLMs, how this affect from one side us as a users and companies that produce foundational models or models in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a matter of fact, thank you for sharing the screening here. OWASP is one of the organizations that are putting a lot of guidance to the industry, and not just because of LLMs, but also machine learning. They also have a top 10 for machine learning, traditional machine learning as well. And they're creating a lot of this collateral to help explain what are the threats that we may be facing as we're implementing AI. And again, we're focusing a lot into LLMs, in the conversation here, but there's a lot of things that actually also apply to traditional machine learning. But specifically to LLMs, as you see in the list, prompt injection is kind of like the top of, in the list. And at the end of the day, we call that input validation in some cases. It is a very hard problem, but they also have additional guidance and examples of other threats like insecure output handling, not only monitor and protect input coming to the LLM, but also the results. And a little bit later in the presentation, I'm going to share with you a little bit more technical details into how you should be, implementing both visibility and control within your environment as you're actually experimenting, as you're putting things into production related to generative AI, whether it's retrieval augmented generation or whether you're fine-tuning a foundational model and so on. A lot of these actually applies. You always hear about training data poisoning and protecting data and make sure that that is actually not tampered with, and so on. And I'm going to be brief in this one here, because I'm going to go a little bit later and explain how that actually works in environments that you may not be training a foundational model from scratch, right? So, and I'm also going to go and talk about the 3 ways that you can deploy, an LLM architecture, and specifically focusing into retrieval augmented generation, which is mostly accessible for most people. And I'll explain that. But you have things from denial of service, which is a no-brainer. Supply chain is a huge challenge right now. If you're familiar with Hugging Face, that's one out of several platforms that you can exchange models, but definitely the most popular for LLMs. And just recently, there were different models that were pulled out because they were manipulated by threat actors, right? And it was specifically because of some insecure, implementations that we have, like Pickle, in machine learning for quite some time, that nobody actually has paid attention to security, right? You also have things like sensitive information disclosure, also plugins. Even though this is evolving by the second, things are moving so fast. Like you saw the announcements from OpenAI yesterday, more announcements from Google and the rest, today. So this is changing very, very fast, and the way that you're actually interacting with these platforms and ecosystems is actually changing. But you're always going to have a way to either play with your data, in other words, make something actionable with your data, or have third-party plugins that can actually give you additional context to then provide to an LLM to do something, right? Whether it's summarization, a chatbot, automated action, and so on. And as people are integrating those within their environment, they're introducing a lot of security one-on-one issues in, especially in the plugin design and APIs. The other thing that I'm going to highlight in here before we go into the next topic is excessive agency and over-reliance. In the past, and I will say, for many years that I've been doing security, we have always said, hey, least privilege is one of the fundamentals of security. You probably even now, learn about it in kindergarten. I mean, we put these security best practices in front of everybody, whether you're preparing for a certification, whether you're, again, even in high school, now you're learning about the principles of least privilege. Fast forward many years, now we're in the world of AI, and yet the same mistakes are actually happening right now. We're giving too much autonomy to some of these systems, especially whenever you're looking at agent-based systems, that you don't even have a way to map what that agent is doing based on the user and a privilege that should be doing, right? Like you see a lot of implementations using agents that they actually have all the way to administrative access to systems that you shouldn't have not. And that's a big one in here. And of course, the other one is the over-reliance and so on. So If you don't mind, what I can do is I can share a few things related to the implementations that we're actually seeing, not only at Cisco, but across the industry, how people can leverage, of course, the power of LLMs, but how we're also introducing some of the security issues as well.
Yeah, sure, please.
So I'm going to start, as a matter of fact, share my screen real quick, but let me go really quick to PowerPoint.
Yeah, by the way, you mentioned
And this is something.
Yeah, sorry. By the way, you mentioned about Hugging Face, and this platform is constantly improving security also, and we can now see embedded pickle scanning in their platform as well, as you mentioned.
Absolutely. So as a matter of fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of this for kind of a preview of a presentation that I'm doing at Cisco Live in a couple of weeks. And this one is specifically going over how to protect retrieval augmented generation. But I'm going to take a step back and even explain what that means for those of you that may not be familiar with the concept, and explain how any organization or any individual can leverage LLMs right now, a little bit beyond just talking to ChatGPT, right? So you can absolutely train an LLM from scratch, right? If you're an organization like Cisco, like Google, like NVIDIA, etc., you have a lot of resources, so we're kind of spoiled. And you can train a foundational model from scratch. It's extremely expensive. It requires tons and tons of data to even make a difference. And also, it requires a significant infrastructure and expertise. The other way that you can do is actually you can fine-tune a model. And this is where platforms like Hugging Face and open source models actually are very attractive by many people, because they can use a foundational model and then fine-tune it to a specific goal, whether you want to create the perfect network troubleshooter or the perfect project manager, the perfect programmer, and so on. You can fine tune a model and then give it some your specific data and use cases, and then do quantization techniques to alter the weights, and then specialize that model in something, right? That is still expensive. It is still requires some infrastructure and expertise. So what most people, and whenever I say people, organizations nowadays are trying to see is that how can I leverage either a fine-tuned LLM that somebody created or a third party, or a foundational model, but use my data to provide some additional context and so on. And that's whenever retrieval augmented generation comes into play, because it's very attractive for most organizations that don't have the resources of like the Cisco of the world, or the Microsoft of the world, or the OpenAIs of the world, because it's way less expensive. It requires less hardcore data science expertise, and it's more accessible to everybody, right? Now, what you were going over in the top 10 for LLMs, that applies to all three implementations, right? But there's a little bit more beyond the top 10 for LLMs, right? So as I mentioned, and I will make this available a little bit later, there's a lot of organizations to actually trying to understand what are going to be the AI attacks, so the attacks against AI systems, whether it's retrieval augmented generation, a model itself, or even traditional machine learning, and what are the tactics and techniques that attackers are actually using, right? So we went over the top 10 for LLMs. There's also an OWASP top 10 for machine learning, which is mltop10.info. All the projects related to AI in OWASP, they actually now have a landing page called owaspai.org. And then a sister organization, I will call, from OWASP, another organization that is very popular in cybersecurity called MITRE. They also created a set of matrices for the tactics and techniques that attackers use to perform some action, right? And MITRE ATT&CK, one very popular framework / matrix, has been used for many years by different threat hunters and different incident responders to truly understand the tactics and techniques for attacks. If you fast forward now to the world of AI, of course, we have the MITRE Atlas, which, let me actually go there real quick and share my screen. See if this works. There we go. So basically, it's the same analogy of the MITRE attack that is very popular again for traditional threat hunting and threats against any systems. But now we have this matrix specifically for machine learning and AI, right? And this is evolving. As a matter of fact, I can guarantee you that if you come here in the next few weeks, more things are going to be added because there's more research, more things that we are actually contributing to the industry. If there's something in the MITRE attack or the MITRE Atlas, it is a true real life tactic and technique from attackers. And if you look at the matrix in here, the top is basically the day in the life of an attack. And then if you go down, you have all the techniques and all the sub-techniques. You can expand it to the sub-techniques. And then from there, you have an explanation, some use cases, some mitigations, and so on. If you compare that to the traditional attack framework, very similar, a lot more. And a lot of people say, okay, so does that mean that I don't have to worry about attack anymore? I have to concentrate into the AI world. Well, the bad news is that no, you have to pay attention to both. You have to pay attention to traditional security. And then, of course, what are the tactics and techniques that attackers are using for machine learning and artificial intelligence? So go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for sharing these two websites. I have questions for your first slide. What about fine-tuning small language models? Does it affect costs? Can they perform and compete with large language models in some use cases?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, so the short answer is yes. Smaller models are extremely popular because of that now. You don't require that huge infrastructure, like if you were going to train a foundational model from scratch. However, even with smaller models, one of the things that people don't truly understand is that you have to have a significant amount of data to even make a change in weights. Like, people think that, okay, I can fine tune this in Bedrock or Vertex or SageMaker, etc. But you don't have enough data to even make a difference, right? So yes, you actually go through training, you go through a whole bunch of accuracy metrics and so on, but is it truly different of what you actually started? However, that is today. This is changing significantly. I can guarantee you that a year from now, we'll have the same conversation and things are going to get less expensive. Computation is increasing significantly, so compute power will increase, and these models are becoming more efficient. Again, smaller models can actually have a really, really good performance in comparison to others, especially if you're specializing a model, right? A lot of the general purpose models, you have a lot of weights that are related to different languages. And I'm talking about like spoken languages, Spanish, English, Chinese, etc. Right? Plus you have Python, plus you have, and so on. So the smaller model that perhaps, you only need English, Python, and specific best practices for like networking, let's say, that's a little bit more attainable than fine tuning something that is huge. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks.
Now, what I'm sharing here is basically a summary of another document that I skipped on that list, but I will make it available. And it's something that NIST put together, and the final draft, and I always mention that this is draft because it's going to change throughout time, but the final publication is now available. It's in the link in the bottom of the screen here. Again, we'll make this available as well. And if you look at the, very hard to read, but if you look at the left, that's what the threats for predictive AI, has happened we have them in predictive AI implementations. And if you look to the right, that's actually generative AI. They provided really good guidance. As a matter of fact, let me actually go to the document real quick. And we're definitely not going to be reading a document here. You can actually put this into ChatGPT and ask questions into it. A lot easier than asking Omar. But what I want to highlight is a few things. This was something in collaboration with a few folks in the industry. So a lot of people think that, oh, this is only guidance that comes from the US government and so on. But NIST is actually working with a lot of experts across the industry. And as a matter of fact, from here, I know a few, because Cisco is a partner, and we actually invested, full disclosure, in a company called Robust Intelligence. And they are one of the contributors to this paper, and or this special publication. And as you see here, Ali and Hiram are there. But again, what this is going over is, yes, some overlap with the top 10 in OWASP. Yes, some overlap of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. But what are the techniques for you to do evaluation? What are other tactics and techniques that attackers can use for evasion attacks, right? And what are the mitigations for them? What are some real life poisoning attacks, right? And some of the limitations also of poisoning attacks. So I strongly recommend for you to at least glance through it. But again, this is something that you can ingest into ChatGPT and summarize it and so on. Now, what I want to go over, this is pretty high level, but specifically, what is RAG, right? So RAG is the ability for you to use some context. It can be your private data, it can be a brand new piece of information that get released, and then you vectorize that data. Basically, you create embeddings, you put into a vector database, and then you can have either a human or a machine ask a question, in other words, a prompt, and they do semantic search from that data, retrieve chunks from that data, provide some additional context to the LLM, and then get a better answer. So the main thing about RAG is to reduce the likelihood of hallucinations, and of course, also to make sure that you're providing additional context that can solve your problem, right? Whether it's a chatbot to a client, or an assistant, or a co-pilot, or an automated action, right? Then I have a write-up of what is RAG, cs.co/RAG, goes into a little bit more detail. But if you look at the vectorization aspect of it, right? So again, you get your data. Let's say there are security best practices, or vulnerability information, or the root cause of vulnerabilities like CWEs, and so on. You basically use an embedding model that in some cases is provided by, let's say, OpenAI. Let's say we're using OpenAI for simplicity here. We're using GPT-4o, which just got released yesterday. And you can use that for inference, but the way that you actually get this data into a vector database or to create embeddings is by using an embedding model, which is separate from your inference model. And in some cases, and I will not say in some cases, in a lot of cases, I see a lot of organizations using, very sensitive data, raw, like OpenAI embeddings, or an insecure implementation of an embedding model. Perhaps you put in the cloud for experimentation. You get in this sensitive data, convert into numbers, put them to a vector store, and in some of those cases, the vector store doesn't even support encryption, which is actually my next thing in here, right? But one thing that people don't realize, that we were talking about prompt injection, is what is even a prompt, right? So in RAG, you have the human prompt. You also can have system prompt templates, and libraries like LangChain, Llama Index, makes this very, very attractive, because you can create this chain of operations and use prompt templates to then perform some task, or to give some context to the model, saying, you are a network administrator. You will provide me with data in this format. You will not make up answers, and you will only look at the retrieval of this database. If you don't know the answer, say, hey, I'm not sure. So all these type of techniques, you can put them in there. And then you can also have AI generate your prompts, which they're going to generate it better than Omar, for sure, right? But all these needs to be secure and monitored. So how do you protect all that, right? And we're going to talk about a little bit in the next few seconds. But I have tons of examples. We were talking about prompt injection, tons of examples in a GitHub repository that I basically use for like ethical hacking, exploit development, and so on. Other talks and presentations. It's called hackerrepo.org. If you go to AI security research, I have dozens of them that you can bypass GPT-4 for sure. And that's the GitHub repository that you see in the bottom of the screen. But what are some of the security considerations in here? Again, I mentioned that you can use your data, and then you will convert that data into some numbers. That's what we call embeddings. So the AI model can understand and can, the whole system, is not only the model, can actually do retrieval, get relevant data, do semantic search, and so on. You need to have a good strategy for categorizing that information and then creating indexes. If you don't have that, your retrieval is going to be less than optimal, right? You're still going to be potentially having hallucinations and so on. But imagine now if I'm also an attacker, and if I can mess up with the way that you're indexing data, that I can potentially manipulate your embedding model, right? That is creating these numbers and so on, right? And specifically, one big challenge is that most embedding models may be leaking sensitive data for training. Like you're getting your sensitive policies, your best practices, whatever the data you want to actually make some action. And now yet you probably use a raw OpenAI embedding model that is now using the data for training. So those are the things that you have to pay attention to. Of course, there's many different solutions from OpenAI, Azure, and so on. You can build your own, but just always keep in mind of the whole ecosystem, not just the AI model that is doing inference. The other thing, and go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask you, in which use cases we can apply RAG, for example, and in science, a lot of foundational models now have big context window, like Claude, for example, 200K, Gemini, and Llama 3, up to 1 million token. So in which cases we can use directly context window to operate with some additional context, and in which we can apply RAG?
That's a perfect question. You're absolutely right. There's a whole bunch of nerd fights right now on should I invest in a vector database implementation, and should I just go straight using one of these models that have you can put a book as a prompt and then get some results. Currently, as of today, May 14, 2024, because again this may change, there's a big problem called loss in the middle. And it's a proven, not research, that if you give a lot of context to an LLM, whether it's GPT, Gemini, Claude, an open source model, and so on, you may face hallucinations because of the big of a context. So that's what they call loss in the middle. Now things are going to be improving, right? I'll be very, very full saying, no, don't pay attention to the context windows. Is broken, blah blah. That will change. There are also techniques that you can do to reduce that problem, right? But the attractiveness right now with RAG is for you to use your own data that you may not want to actually give as a prompt, right? And also have some additional controls, because in some cases you may be using multiple models to perform some action, right? Of course, I cannot disclose the things that we're doing behind the scenes, but right now Cisco, has a whole bunch of applications using AI. One of them is WebEx, right? We're not using WebEx today, but one of them is WebEx. WebEx has summarization. It can do transcribing. It can also have cinematic thing. As a matter of fact, a lot of people are not aware, but we're introducing a feature, and I think that they already did, that is generating packets, even with 80% packet loss for audio, You can reconstruct those packets, and you have generative AI create those packets with your voice, and you have crystal clear audio. And I was a little bit adamant whenever we started working with it, but it's actually, they proved me wrong. It's pretty impressive. So if you look at all those implementations, just one product, all these implementations, there are different models and different things that we actually have behind the scenes. It's not just one. It's not just talking to ChatGPT and generating the packets, right? So we have our own models, we have our own vector stores. For summarization, we have inference from a separate, environment. So if you look at that, real life type of implementations, you will see a lot of, no pun intended, multi-model, but implementations out there. So RAG still makes it attractive. The other one is, yes, you can do a lot of function calling. You can do a lot of things natively out of the box, quote unquote, out of the box or out of the cloud, from something like GPTs. You can create your own assistants. You can put your own data in there. But most larger organizations, they're actually still looking into RAG and retrieval methods for having that control and visibility as well. So perfect question.
Yeah, thanks for your answer.
Yeah, so another thing that I wanted to at least draw your attention to is, what are the different elements that you can apply security? And I'm going to go very, very fast in here just because of time. But just from the moment that you're getting your data from your data pipelines, your documents, your PDFs, your databases that you want to, vectorize and index, you have to look on how to protect that information. And in some cases, you have no choice, because there's some regulations that will dictate you should not be, especially if you're taking perhaps the data from a database that you have really good access control, that you have encryption, that you have a lot of security best practices, and then probably somebody within your organization is putting that data that is super secure in here, and then put into a vector database that don't have any encryption at all, right? And that's one of the biggest challenges that we actually have. The other thing is about supply chain security, and especially the embedding model itself, right? Random people grabbing stuff from Hugging Face and not actually doing any validation just because it's cool. They probably saw it in a paper or some write-up or a blog post or and so on. They experiment, and they can potentially introduce some security problems in there. And access control is number one. And I'm seeing this over and over and over. A lot of people that they put things into experimentation. They say, hey, I don't have to actually provide all these things in place that I will put into the production environment. But guess what? Once they have it working, they transfer that to production. And now all these, all these best practices that we have learned for many years are not implemented at all, right? Related to the database itself, I mentioned that most databases, vector databases, don't support encryption. There are a few techniques that I'm going to talk about a little bit later, right? But there are other additional threats: data tampering and corruption, of course. The other one is unauthorized access control that we mentioned, service disruption. So if you look at the way that these databases are being employed, it's not all about just a denial service attack against the database. You can protect, and have some type of guardrails in there. But it's also inefficient scaling. It is a lot different of retrieving information from a traditional database that having an LLM and chatbots and automated agents at this scale, right, to actually have that retrieval process. And I'm talking about, yes, there may be milliseconds or seconds, of the process, but imagine now that all your customer bases. Imagine if I actually have a way that that you will interact with the tag. Right now that you have interacting with a firewall copilot and so on, and it will take you minutes for you to actually get that. Of course, that's not good for user experience, right? So in some of these cases, you actually have to look into, can the attackers cause something, not a traditional denial service attack, that whole bunch of packets, but can it cause something within the environment that can also lead into resource exhaustion and so on, especially since inference and also vectorization and retrieval cost money, whether it's in the cloud or in your own infrastructure and everything, it's compute power, RAM, and so on that you're spending a lot of money on, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that you can implement for enhancing, security. Some of these are newer, and I said newer. Homomorphic encryption is not new, but there's a lot of new research. Currently, full homomorphic encryption is a lot slower, right? So that's the kind of a balance you have. But partial homomorphic encryption can definitely be feasible in some scenarios. But that's not the only thing, right? So you can actually have this newer implementation of secure multivariate computation, which will allow you to have that no single entity has access to the database, right? And then in that case, you can actually protect data a lot. And that goes in hand with searchable encryption, which is another technique, especially using blind storage or oblivious RAM, and also the decentralization and sharding of data across multiple data stores. So all these are newer implementations. There's a lot of research that's actually happening right now in these techniques, that even if you have databases that don't support encryption by default, right? Some of the open source ones that don't, but at least you can actually have some type of implementations that can help protect some of that. But at the end of the day, if you're putting this in your organization, if you're using vector databases, if you're using not public data, but your private sensitive information, just make sure that whether it's a commercial vendor or an open source vector database, that they really support some type of encryption, right? In some cases, actually encrypting the whole, VM, if it's like something like MongoDB Atlas and so on, but they also have a lot of these techniques already embedded within their environment. And talking about retrieval, right? The retrieval component in RAG, that's where we're doing the semantic search. And then you can combine that with ANN and approximate next neighbor algorithms to then get relevant context information with references to that implementation, and then getting a semantic result, right? And there's a whole bunch of additional query and control content validation that you can implement. Of course, query validation, the generated validation, so the generated content, that to make sure that it's not only accurate, but it also doesn't allow you to perhaps exploit another vulnerability or flaw within the system. And of course, the access control. Who's actually going to even have access to this inference? In some cases, a lot of people say, okay, so it's a chatbot, so they're going to get access to that. Well, but not all AI implementations are chatbots. Chatbots are from 2023. 2024 is the year of like automated agents, right? So that you're trying to actually get some actionable outcome into this thing, and in that outcome is to add a route to a core route of the internet, or summarize a WebEx, or potentially apply some search string for your security operations center in Splunk, right? You don't want that output to be accessed to by any system or by anybody within your environment. So you have to actually apply a lot of those. There are open source evaluation frameworks and pipelines. RAGAS is actually an example of them, right? RAGAS is become a little bit popular. But at the end of the day, what we are doing at Cisco, and I guess I have to at least pitch the Cisco story, for visibility and control, we're spending a lot of effort, not only in research, but also in an ecosystem, a product offering called Modific by Upshift. And it's because if you saw the rest of my presentation about all these components, what to monitor, what are the guardrails you have to have in place, and so on, this is easier said than done, right? So a lot of companies actually need help on how to implement this in a safe way, how to monitor it, how to put the guardrails in place, how to scale it, and so on. And that's the idea of Modific, and streamlining the building of applications, and of course, the implementations of generative AI. So I know that I put a whole bunch of slides in here. I guess kind of my preview or my leak from one of my presentations at Cisco Live. But any questions from the chat or? that we
No.
might be getting?
Yes, thanks for sharing this information and thanks for mentioning about Modific. I don't see any questions. Just hey, what's up? I do have a few questions also for you. Since Gen AI tools can generate vulnerable code because of they were trained on outdated CVE database or vulnerable code, how you can see developers can handle this?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm going to capitalize in your question and expand a little bit. So attackers are absolutely using generative AI to create code. So the level of entry for most people, and especially for criminals as well, and bad actors, is increasing. A lot of things are getting abstracted, right? Even if you look at the implementations of generative AI, what I was doing in code with LangChain 6 months ago, now it takes me less code to do, and it's so easy, right? And now LangGraph to do agents, is abstracting a lot of things, right? So yes, it's getting better, easier to interact with LLMs and to generate code and so on. But at the same time, there's a lot of potential to introduce vulnerabilities, right? So attackers are leveraging, the use of AI to create exploits, and that's not an if. It is already happening. We're already seeing, I want to call early indicators, but truly indicators that attackers actually are using as soon as we disclose vulnerabilities, whether it's in open source software or in the code that you actually create, and so on. They're the first ones that are probably going to be taking advantage of security advisories, the diffs and bugs, and so on, to create code. To raise the eyebrows of a few people, even within Cisco, last year I did an internal workshop, and this is a funny story. I digitized my voice using 11 apps. Everybody can do that in 2 seconds. Created a deep fake of Omar, right? And then, so it was with my accent and everything, going over how I cloned the 12,000 advisories from GitHub, the GitHub security advisory database. Out of those, I was able to extract about 7,800, let's call it 8,000 different links to GitHub pull request. And what is in a pull request? Well, a commit or many commits. What is in a commit? A diff, right? So the vulnerable code and your fixed code. If you look at that, that is basically the recipe in most cases for you to create an exploit. You don't have to reverse engineer something. You just look at diffs of bugs that are security vulnerabilities. So I fed that into an LLM, and then I said, create the code. And of course, some of them are very simple as script tags for cross-site scripting that, you don't need an LLM to do that. But in some other ones were pretty eye-catching, right? And that's me with no resources, with just, my very quick, demonstration. Imagine now, very resourceful threat actors, doing this at scale, right? The other thing that concerns me, even outside of generating code and malware and the obfuscation techniques, which I didn't even mention, is the ability for them to do reconnaissance, whether it's active or passive reconnaissance. So if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, the first step of any attack, or as an ethical hacker, the first step that you take is you do reconnaissance. So you look at what are the potential flaws within a system, the ports that are open, and so on. But you can also do that passively and look at the key individuals of the organization, potentially getting stuff from Shodan that, again, Shodan is actually doing the scanning, but you're getting, the information from it. I did a demo of using certificate transparency, which is a good implementation, right? After DigiNotar and Digi started in 2011, they got hacked. We created in the industry this thing called certificate transparency. And then you get a record distributed throughout the internet of all the certificates that are generated by your organization. That can be very attractive for ethical hackers and, of course, true attackers to gather information. Well, now imagine that you get this into AI. potentially even do your own RAG implementation that you get a profile of a company, an individual, and so on. And now you can have your own LLM, probably something like White Rabbit Neo that doesn't, is not, doesn't have any guardrails in place and is uncensored, and then start playing with that data, right? Reconnaissance has, the way that attackers are going to be doing reconnaissance or are doing reconnaissance has changed significantly with this introduction of AI.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, what is your favorite AI security or ML technology or tool or algorithm?
Yeah, so there are a few things. The models, I'm going to start with models. And this is a disclaimer. This is a big audience in here today. This is for educational purposes only. Either myself or Lesky or Cisco is not responsible for the misuse of this information. I always repeat the same. There's a very popular open source model called White Rabbit Neo, right? It's one of many that are there. It's specialized for ethical hacking, right? We call it ethical hacking, but a bad actor can actually use this. It's uncensored, very good. You ask him, create me an exploit, it will create an exploit and it will say thank you, right? And it will give you, emojis after that, right? So you can absolutely do anything with it. There's a whole bunch of other uncensored models, like Olama and uncensored, permutations of it, and so on. Here within the company, we are my organization, the offensive security team that I mentioned to you. We're creating our own, implementations to simulate, attacks and so on. Not only against the company, but again, find vulnerabilities in products and so on. So it's not like one size fits all thing, but White Rabbit Neo is definitely one of the most popular out there. And of course, the stuff that we're doing internally. But the other tools, as a matter of fact, let me actually go and share these. So if you go to the GitHub repository, let me put it into the screen. And I know that I'm looking that way, but I'm visiting a Cisco site this week in Dallas. I'm in a big room today. My screen is over there. So this is the GitHub repository that I mentioned. I started it for like books, video courses, etc. that I do. And I lost my cursor. There we go. And I have a section here called AI Security Research. And I have a section just related to LangChain. Tons and tons of resources in there. AI risk management, machine learning fundamental, prompt injection, prompt engineering, labs that I do. But there's one called GPTs. And there's a list of GPTs that people are putting together. And this, anybody can do a GPT. It's so abstracted, from OpenAI, you can create your own. Like, back to your question, why should you use RAG if you can actually put your data in a GPT? And there's a whole bunch of them. I'm talking about hundreds, right? So dozens, not hundreds. So I'm one of the contributors to that other repository there. But this was actually created by a colleague of mine. I lead the Red Team Village at DEF CON. DEF CON is the biggest hacking conference in the world. One of the goons at DEF CON, he actually created, he goes by Frogger, he created this repository, and we started collecting GPTs related to many different things, whether it's threat hunting, web hacking. Now a lot of things are getting regulated in cybersecurity. I created one for the EU CRA, another one for the executive order in the US, another one for the SSDF attestation or the SSDF best practices and so on. Some tutoring, and tips. So you definitely take advantage of that, right? It's not a tool. It's basically other people's, GPTs that you can absolutely use, again, for free. Now, related to the tools, what you will see is that most of the security tools that we use nowadays, whether it's for the defensive side or for the offensive side, it is a matter of time that they will be incorporating some type of AI implementation. Again, whether it's an assistant, some type of automated action, and so on. At the end of the day, they will be incorporating. For the security tools, for offensive security, I'm gonna just concentrate on that. I don't think that I'm selling a Cisco, tool or a product. Let's say ethical hacking, and I'm doing web application hacking. Most people will use a proxy, something like Burp Suite, or something like the OASIS attack proxy, and so on. Just another OAS project. In the case of Burp Suite, there's a whole bunch of plugins already that are using, AI models that you can point to OpenAI, or you can actually point it to something like Bedrock, and you create your own implementation, and so on. So you get inference from your own uncensored model, right? So you will absolutely see these a lot in the next, it's going to be continuing. I'm not Nostradamus, I cannot tell you in the next 2 months, 3 months, but definitely it's changing by the second.
Yeah, thanks.
Good question.
I shared a link on your repo in our chat.
Thank you.
And my last question will be, which resources do you use to learn about AI and security? You share a lot of links today, but maybe a few websites, I don't know, application.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I don't have the series of websites, but I can definitely make available, and it's not a one size fits all or one silver bullet in there. I'm doing also an AMA with the Cisco insiders this week, and this was actually not a question that people had. And one specifically, they were saying, okay, yes, you have authored books and everything. Are books obsolete? You using even books to actually learn and keep informed. And of course, if I said, books are not going to change and blah blah, just click on closing your web browser and then don't listen to me, because that's foolish. The way that I'm learning and the way that we're going to continue to learn is going to dramatically change, and it's already changing, right? And especially how fast technology is. It is impossible. The first thing that I'm going to say, even before I tell you the resources, it is impossible for you, for me, to anybody to catch up with the amount of things that are happening. By the time that we potentially, adjourn here today, there will be 100 more new tools related to AI. Probably some of the things that, we just discussed in the beginning of the course, somebody else created an implementation that made it obsolete. So it is absolutely changing fast. The way that I keep up with this is mostly, yes, I use books for blueprints, but I'm using the context of academic papers, research from other research is not only a very beautiful academic paper from MIT, Harvard, UC Berkeley, etc. And we do that a lot. We fund a lot of this research at Cisco in our shift. But also is this type of conversations with my industry peers, right? A lot of, as I mentioned to you earlier, a lot of the techniques and even the questions that we're asking nowadays should have been asked 10 years ago, right? So not because it's new, especially in security, doesn't mean that the traditional security doesn't apply here, right? And what we have to do is provide additional guidance and so on. So to keep up on what is the guidance of exactly what you mentioned, context windows, should I use that or not? Vector databases, embeddings, dimensionality of data, how to protect data, homomorphic encryption, data privacy, retention, all that things is changing by the second. There's no way that I can just pick up a book and say, okay, tell me the things that happened May 13 on May 14, right? However, what I'm doing is you at least have to have some of the very fundamental knowledge that a lot of these platforms, and I know that I work a lot with like Cisco Press and Pearson and O'Reilly and all this stuff, but a lot of these platforms are going to be adopting to this new way of learning, right? That you may be, and they already have, right? So you have a book, you have a video course in the past, and you watch a video course with the book, and you have like practice questions for an exam, and you have some type of lab. And now imagine if you have book that you probably just highlight a few things, but the AI is helping you navigate and create a plan, a complete plan for you that this week you're going to be learning about this stuff. It highlights in the book. It fetches the latest research for you. There's a lot of research GPT implementations out there that can grab this information, put it some context together, and then present it to you. That's an area of exploration. I will not call it research, but exploration that I'm doing is to see how I can also leverage AI, things like, again, the concepts of the research GPT, to then ingest its information, and specifically to my use case is for security. If I get a new research on security, a new method, a new tool, a new type of technique, something that gets added to attack or Atlas, how can I actually get all this type of information and then learn from it, right? But yeah, it is changing significantly, right? And traditionally, if you asked me that question even a year ago, I would say yes. You go read these blog posts, you subscribe to these academic paper feeds and so on. But it has kind of be a combination of, and you have to select, right, and how you can scale. Right? It's not the answer that probably you were looking for. A silver bullet answer. Yeah.
No, thanks. This can help to you need to monitor different resources as well as read a lot of books to understand fundamental things.
And one thing, actually, you just mentioned it right now, which is that's perfect. You said it in 2 seconds better than I said it for the last 10 minutes. You have to, in order for you to scale, you have to concentrate, and also starts with the fundamentals. I am the first one that gets super excited about, oh my God, look at this new research paper that is talking about double quantization or QLoRa techniques that, to fine tune a model. But if you don't start with what is even quantization, what are the fundamentals? It's like whenever people ask me, I want to get started with cybersecurity, but they don't know networking, they don't know, even principles of compute and programming. Of course, start with that before you actually go to exploit development. Same thing applies in here.
Yeah, thanks for answering this question also, and excited to have you today, Omar, and appreciate for sharing your experience.
Thank you for having me. Thank you everybody for joining.